We are delighted to welcome you to the 2020 Global Design Forum, the London Design Festival's curated thought leadership programme, celebrating design and the minds shaping its future. This year we're hosting the Global Design Forum online, and it will feature a unique mix of talks, debates and workshops that together reflect some of the most innovative thinking in the world of design today, from design in a post-pandemic world to digital futures, to the power of AI, and of course to our environment. We hope that this year's Global Design Forum will inform, inspire and entertain you. What better way to start the Global Design Forum this year than with a conversation featuring our long-term partner and very good friends, Pentagram. When I sat down to write some words to introduce them, I ended up with several pieces of paper. And then I took a look at their website. And of course I realised that all my efforts were a complete waste of time, because if you look on the Pentagram website, you will see the perfect description of them. It talks about them being a multidisciplinary, independently owned design studio. It talks about their work encompassing graphics and identity, products and packaging, exhibitions and installations, websites and digital experiences, advertising and communications, sound and motion. 25 partners, all practicing designers. Whether they work collaboratively or independently, they do so in friendship. Ah, what a way to describe your business, or in fact, in their sense, partnership. They talk a bit about their structure, how it's unique, but I'll let you go to the web and enjoy it reading yourselves. The thing about Pentagram is that everything they do, whether it's their description on their website, and of course to the work they do, to the way they behave, everything is about the highest possible quality. And today we've got a real treat, because we have 3 Pentagram partners working in London and in New York, talking about the business, about themselves, about Pentagram's work, spanning 5 decades. I remember when I was a 16-year-old art student being excited about these 3 extraordinary designers called Fletcher Forbes Gill, who later on became part of the extraordinary organisation which is now called Pentagram. We have Paula Scher. She's one of the most influential graphic designers in the world, and she's been a partner in the New York office of Pentagram since 1991. We have Dominic Lipper, who's a world-famous designer, but he works in London, not in New York. And we have Eddie Opara, who was born in London, in Wandsworth in fact, but works in the New York office. So we have 3 partners who know all about the international relationship between London and New York and the much bigger world of this fantastic company. They are going to talk together in conversation, and the talk is very appropriately titled Hands Across the Sea.
Good afternoon, welcome to the Global Design Forum. My name is Dominic Lipper. I'm joined by my partners Paula Scher and Eddie Opara. And the theme of today's conversation is Hands Across the Sea, Connection Through Graphic Design with Pentagram Design.
I'm Paula Scher. I was born in Washington, D.C., where my father was a civil servant. I wanted to be an artist. I went to Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, where I learned what graphic design was when I was a junior, and it was the only thing I was actually very good at school. I moved to New York when I was 22 and graduated with $50 in a portfolio. I went to work right away. I worked at Random House, where I designed the insides of children's books, and then got a job at CBS Records, where I first designed advertising and then record covers. And I was an East Coast art director for 10 years, making about 150 covers a year, and left to start my own business in 1982 with a fellow Tylerite named Terry Coppell. We had the business for 7 years. We hit the Bush recession, and just at the moment I thought I was going to have to cash it all in, I got an invitation to join Pentagram in 1990. I closed down my business and joined 15 white men and have been there ever since.
But that's changed a little bit now, hasn't it?
It changed quite a bit.
Okay.
There were the original partners were there when I first joined, all 5 of them.
Wow. Eddie, do you want to go?
Hi, I'm Eddie Opara. I'm a partner in the New York office at Pentagram. I am born in Wandsworth, London, proud of where I come from. And my mum and a few of my relatives tried to shut me up at church with a piece of paper and a pencil. So they thought I was, autistic. I thought I was autistic to a certain degree. I eventually, similar to Paula, that's all I was pretty much good at school. I eventually got a place at the London College of Printing, now the LCC. And I did 4 years in media production design, which is equivalent to graphic design degree. I then moved over to America. I got a place at Yale University, MFA there. And the funny thing was that my father thought, even though he thought I was autistic, thought that I would be a lawyer. I am Nigerian. Nigerians often say these things. He thought that I'd probably go to Yale for law. I eventually went for graphic design. He was still happy. After my 2 years there, I got the bug in regards to the internet. And this was, this is between 95 and 97. Internet was sort of growing. I didn't move to New York City. I moved to Boston, Mass and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and focused my attention on experimenting with software for 4 years with a company called Art Technology Group, which is now owned by Oracle. I was focusing my attention on what they call social networks. We didn't really call it that back then, but I knew then, don't do it, but it was done anyway. I eventually got myself over to New York City, worked at Maritime Forces for a while, and then at 2x4 for about 3 to 4 years with Michael Rock and Susan Sellers and Georgie Stout, which was fantastic. After that, I started my own studio called Map Office, focusing my attention on some, projects and cultural, educational, somewhat. And I then, got a call from Paula, who sat me down over a salad and a chicken schnitzel and said, would you like to join Pentagram? I remember that day. And then he choked on my chicken schnitzel. I eventually joined in 2010 and been there since.
So my name is Dominic Lipper. I'm, again, designer and partner at Pentagram. So my journey is strangely familiar to my 2 partners, that both my parents studied painting at Oxford. They met at Oxford University. My father, who is Italian-American, that's why I have this strange name, Lippa, studied advertising at the Museum School of Art in Philadelphia. And because he had served in the army, got a opportunity through the GI Bill to study abroad, and therefore went to Oxford, and where he met my mother. So our family house is full of art, painting, design. My father then set up an ad agency in London, was fairly successful. Academically, I have no qualifications, barely any qualifications. Art and design was, from an early age, really the only thing I could possibly do. I, like Eddie, went to study at LCP, London College of Printing. Slightly older than Eddie. I studied in 81 to 84 in a very depressed area of South London, Elephant and Castle, Eddie. And then I graduated. I worked at a couple of companies in London, and then met my business partner or design partner, Harry Pierce, in 86, I believe. So we've worked together quite many years. We actually then both, over a period of time, worked with John Sorrell at his design company in Newell & Sorrell between 87 and 90. And then Harry and I set up Lippa Pierce in 1990, again, at the beginning of a recession. It's always good to set up a company in a recession. You're cheap. That's what John McConnell told me. And then we worked together, Harry and I, with Lippa Pierce until around 2005, 2006. And after several conversations over quite a few years, Harry and I both joined the London office of Pentagram in 2006. I think also I first met Paula in a restaurant in London with Michael Beirut and John Rushworth. And it felt like a sort of mafia meeting. We were at the very back room of some French restaurant near the V&A. And it was a very strange conversation. I think Harry and I both felt very nervous. But equally, I think, I was going to ask us all why we joined. I think Harry and I were looking for something. We were quite pleased with how Lippa Pierce was, but it felt like it just reached its level. We didn't really have any international profile. And even though financially we were quite strong, the idea of working with what I would consider, without flattering Paula, heroes in graphic design was too much of a temptation I couldn't resist. So I think Harry and I, we used to have meetings with lawyers and Pentagram in London, and Harry would always say, well, if you don't want to join, we don't have to join. And I would say the next day, well, if you don't want to join, we don't have to join. It was like a couple going on some weird dating scheme. But eventually, I think we just all said, as in Harry and I said, if we don't take this chance, we'll never look back. And if it doesn't work out, fine. But after now, nearly 15 years, which have flown by, I still believe in Harry. I think the same, is that it was the best decision of our lives. But Paula, why did you initially join? Was it financial?
I was in a very strange situation. I had in the 80s, when I started my own business, I became known as this retro designer. I was doing this kind of typography that was period oriented, and it coincided with a business I started with Terry, and we began getting a lot of projects based on that. And they were small projects, and we ran a small boutique sort of business that was really hurt by the recession, and also hurt by the fact that I received all this public criticism from academia for a poster I did for Swatch Watch, which was horrible for me, because at that particular period of time, Terry had left the business because the magazine industry had collapsed. And so I was left alone in the business, getting these sort of horrible attacks in the media for this work I was doing, which looks very tame today, but at the time it was all over the history books. There are women who've told me that they saw a design history book when they were in college, and I was the only woman in it, and what they wrote about me was bad. There was that sort of just a terrible reputation attached to it. And I was scared I wasn't really going to be able to overcome it or work. And then I was also facing the problem of being a woman alone in business, where the sort of job I would get would be the same job I just did. And they were fairly youth-oriented marketplace, because I came out of the music industry. So I was doing youth culture projects. But the people who were designing youth culture projects were then now 10 and 15 years younger than me. So I wasn't going to get away with that for a long time. Then Woody Pirtle, who was a friend of mine from AIGA, I was on the board of AIGA in the early 80s, which is where I met Colin Forbes, where I met Peter Harrison, where I met Michael Beirut, where I really met everybody in the design community way back in really early days. And Woody came over and asked me if I was interested in joining Pentagram. And to be honest with you, at that particular time, while I liked the idea of the opportunity of it, I perceived Pentagram as being really staid. So I decided to do it for two reasons. One, because I thought I was at what I call catch 40, where the kind of project you're getting is the project you're going to get forever if you don't make significant change. That I knew that, and I knew that if I stayed on my own, I would get the same thing and would begin to go down. And the other reason I joined was that I had called my friend Michael Beirut, and Woody had talked to him too, which I suspected Woody was going to, because I talked to Woody about it when I had lunch. Had you thought about inviting Michael? So that if Michael joined, it meant there was one younger person doing other stuff that was joining this group that seemed a little bit reserved to me. And so it made it better for me to actually join the group. But I have to say that the beginning was terrible. I mean, my first 4 or 5 years at Pentagram, I didn't know why I had done this thing. I found the culture bizarre. I found the accounting system horrible. Like I felt like everybody was looking in my underwear drawer, you know, like the whole thing of having your numbers on a sheet and report it out there. I found that totally humiliating. I didn't relate to the work in the office, but I think that was really, now looking back on it, so much to our advantage, because I think a new partnership actually moved the New York office forward, because it was very much the Wild West, and you had to kind of invent it as you go. So it was sort of learning the founding of the business and the understanding of the principles of it from both Colin Forbes, but also Alan Fletcher, who was there for a year. And Colin and Alan were perfect balances to each other, because Colin was all about systems and the structure and the premise and the genius that makes Pentagram run and continue, and Alan was all about making stuff. So if you take those two forces and put them together, they're really at the heart of a business. And that if you want to define Pentagram, you can define it within those two early partners who really had the vision of how this thing worked together. And Alan was only a partner of mine for 1.5 years and left. And I was actually devastated when he went, because I felt so connected to him. But the reality was he has and still has this legacy that was Pentagram that you still come to when you look back at what is the foundation of the company. So
do you think those principles still exist? That combination between the making and the sort of financial structure.
It exists within all of us, and it parts of it. You know, some people lean to the Colin side, some people lean to the Alan side. I mean, you can see it in the way the partners operate. You can almost go down and narrate it if you want to get out and look at it like that. It's the basis. You know, it's strategy and management, and it's art. You know, and that if you lose the art side, the strategy and management will make the company still very smart but neutral. And if you lean on the art side, you're just going to make a mess. You know, you need the strategy and management so that they work together really perfectly.
What about you, Eddie? Does that apply to how you came in? Because I remember when at our partners meeting, your work was put up, and I was embarrassed because I didn't know you, and I thought I knew every English designer. Although I remember some of your work, you had. Didn't you have anti-Thatcher things in there? Or, I think you're on mute, Eddie.
Margaret Thatcher, the milk snatcher.
I've heard that before.
I mean, I think that's what, you know, it was, I sort of introduced myself. I think I had done a lecture at the Walker Art Centre. Yeah, I did. And I wanted to sort of explain who I was and where I came from. And, you know, I'm a product of the late 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And, you know, Margaret Thatcher still around in the 80s and 90s. And how she just made my life a total misery from the get-go of, you know, when I was 6 years old and teacher comes into my classroom and says, now boys, unfortunately, this is the last day that you'll have milk. And we wanted to know why. And she basically said, ask Margaret Thatcher. Initially, the map office was set up by myself and my really good friend, one of my best friends, George Plesko, who was my roommate at Yale. And, you know, we get on like a house on fire when we were doing work. And we also worked at Art Technology Group for many years. And, you know, work, you know, picked up exceptionally quickly. And so did, you know, employees exceptionally quickly. And the work was sort of varied, but to really, you know, feed myself, I had to deal with, you know, York real estate design, branding, which brings in a lot of money. So that was really at the sort of the forefront, sort of, you could say, the foundations of how I sort of started. You know, recession did hit, and, you know, what's first to go? Real estate, cultural projects. You're basically, you know, you're at a loss to a certain degree. We had a few projects that sort of held us up, and clients that really did help at the time. I remember Graham Wood, formerly of Tomato, actually helped out. He was at JWT at the time. And it was, you know, really, really great of him to sort of help me in that particular time. And, you know, recession is all about the idea of resetting, right? It's all about rethinking. And I was rethinking. I was potentially looking at a partner, or going back to London, restarting oneself. I just met my, you know, future wife. These things were going through my head. And then, you know, actually Lisa Strasfeld, who was a former partner, gave me a call. I knew her from Yale, and also from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the connection of MIT and the company I used to work for. And she basically said, you know, you should come to do a lecture at Pentagram. And so, you know, I thought, oh, free food, free drink, fantastic. I'm all about food. And literally, everybody's all about food. That's why you go to things. And so the fact of the matter was that I went, and you know, the rest is history, as you know. I met with Paula, and we went through the rigmarole in regards to Pentagram. But starting at Pentagram, it's not so different to Paula. I didn't have any white hairs at all. You know, in all honesty, it felt like if you're, let's say, the president of the United States and you've just been elected, and you're like, oh, wow, you know, when Obama was elected, he was like, you know, black hair and everything, really handsome. He's got, you know, the minute you open the Pandora's box, and he's just, everything goes white. And that's literally what I felt about when I first started. And I talked to Paula one day, and she said, it really takes 7 years. It really does take 7 years. And she's totally right. And, you know, I talked to her again with Michael Barut in regards to my frustrations, and I changed my model. And I think that's an important factor. The reason why I joined Pentagram was I needed to talk to people. I needed to have a family.
Yeah.
I needed to have advice instead of just picking up a phone and talking to a mate, and, you know, and they're like, oh, don't worry, it's all going to be all right, don't worry. And then you put the phone down, you're all on your own again. That's not the case. It's not the case. I wanted to do bigger, better projects as well. And to me, I actually sort of see myself as exceptionally young at Pentagram, even though it's 10 years come October 1st. That's exceptionally young. And so I've got a ways to go to really, you know, establish oneself. What I'm seeing right now in the world, especially in design, is like, we'll just pick up on something and do it really fast. And I want to be the creative head when I'm like 16. And it's like, well, you know, or 20, whatever it is. It's like, slow down.
Yeah.
You've got this for the rest of your life. This is more than a profession. This is a way of life.
But a lot of other models, the founders obviously sell out and leave early because they want to play golf or shit like that. I mean, we always talk about, all of us partners, we're in it for the long term. I mean, the model allows us to do this, and you said this, Paula, allows us to do the work we need to, what we want to do in the environment we want to work at. What I'm also interested in New York is you had Colin and Peter that both, they're both English, were they? And,
Peter was an expat.
all right.
He came over earlier, and his accent wasn't as thick as Colin's. He was easy to understand.
But
He was raised in the UK.
So, but did Colin, you know, because I remember talking to you, Eddie, about, you know,
Yeah.
you put on your English accent a bit more when you're in New York because they all love the English accent. I mean, you even said to me, you even said, you know, I would do really well in because I had an English accent, you know. Yeah. But the fact that also I find it interesting that New York has taken, you know, Luke is obviously Luke, Eddie, and now Matt. Why did Colin have this idea about New York? And Paul, can you talk a bit about almost like the tensions between London and New York, and because they still exist a bit. I mean, I think they're healthy because they're competitive. But at the time, why did Colin do it?
New York, because he wanted to live in New York.
Right.
He went to New York. He'd made friends in New York, and he wanted to live there. He also was at a point with the London office where he was actually at loggerheads with some of his partners, and he wanted to get away from it. And he moved to New York. And it was really an outpost. He didn't have Peter join him as a partner, I think, until the mid 80s. He moved to New York in 1978, and he moved in with George Nelson. He rented space with George Nelson, and then he had a terrific designer named Dan Friedman join him, but he was never a partner. He was an associate. And Dan worked with him for a while, and then went to Ansbach Portugal Grossman, which was another big design firm at the time. Now, I like saying the names of these firms like Ansbach Portugal Grossman because they go away when everybody dies, and Pentagram doesn't. What was interesting for Colin was that he came to the States, sort of put up his British flag, and nobody cared. Nobody really knew who Pentagram was here. And I remember when I was asked to join and went over to meet the partners, and got to London and began to realize in the city of London how much of it was Pentagram, whether you saw boots on every block or the V&A Museum or all these brands and Halfords. I mean, things that I never thought about were everywhere. And it was not that way in New York. In New York, it really happened for us in the 90s. It was not there previously. It didn't have the same footprint. And Colin wanted to start that. And once he saw it actually going, he was ready to step out and leave, you know, and go to his horse farm in North Carolina, where he's been ever since. But the reality was he had the vision and he brought it to the States. And his scramble to build the office was really to find the American partnership in New York. And he wanted an American partner named Woody Pirtle, who through the 80s was perhaps the most important designer in the United States. And he had come from Texas, and Colin could not lure him because Woody just, even though he knew who the Pentagram partners were, he was more impressed with London than moving to New York because there was no reputation in New York. And finally, life circumstances had Woody moved to New York. To a degree, Colin had the vision of what the New York office could be, but Woody picked the partners and got them to join. And so that what you're seeing in the New York office was really the selection of Woody Pirtle with Colin's backing. I think what happens is if there's a clump of partners and they come in at the same time, and I haven't really thought this out carefully for proof, but if a clump of partners come in the same time and they congeal and they set a tone, if they're not disrupted by younger partners, they're going to ultimately deteriorate and the organization is going to lose creative edge. You need the older partners to help guide the younger partners, but you need the younger partners to be actually pushing upwards. And that's what makes the office healthy. And that if then the partners go at the right period of time, there'll be a whole new generation and the same thing will happen again. And I think the New York, London thing, and I have to just not include the satellite offices because they're not setting the same tenor. You know,
Yeah.
these one-person offices are they're a different animal. But I think the two big offices really are balancing each other in this great way.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, because I think back to after a few years when Harry and I went in, the fact that we got Marina in, and then we got Jodie and Luke in, and then, you know, it started to build momentum. And what those guys are bringing, I mean, the inquiries that are now going through the door are really, you know, they're big dynamic projects. Because
Well,
Jodie and Luke.
if you look at yourself in this position, when you and Harry came in, you were a disruptor, right?
Yeah.
It was, people called it a merger, you know, that you came in as a powerful force, you came into the office and you set a new standard and a new tenor to the office. Now you're actually the establishment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these guys are coming up and it's great.
Obviously being the lone female, and then we've got Marina, Natasha and Emily in, and then the dynamic has also changed in terms of color with Eddie and Naresh, and, you know, I mean, as you said at the beginning, you look back at how it was. I mean, we wonder how we survived, because it was like this weird. I mean, it's so different now for all of us, don't you think? I mean, what I was going to talk about was our own favorite pieces of work, and I was talking to Eddie about this yesterday, about the big projects and the small projects that we all like. So there's two issues then. One, the fact that we've got a much clearer, diverse platform, which I think is healthy. But then I'll also want to talk about what your own personal, you know, projects are that you've been allowed to do at or, you know, Pentagram's allowed you to do. Where should we start? Eddie?
There was one project that actually also Paula had acknowledged, which was called Stealth, that I had designed, and it was about the aspects of Black identity as a Black man. And it was connected to the Invisible Man and the idea of the stealth bomber, and these sort of contradictory elements coming together to create the sense of personality. But it's not just that; it was also the form that it took and how it sort of tessellates. And so, you know, client, you know, you talk to a client about that, right? That you want to do that for a client, they'll be like, and so what happened was I did that, and then a client said, "I actually really like that. I would like you to do something in our, you know, in our sales space on the brand that I was working on." And so those things, they're triggers. They are real major triggers for clients and others to really sort of take seriously. The same thing happened with this program was called the MIG, which we built, content management structure that we built. And clients just started saying, "Oh, you know, that looks actually fantastic." And more and more clients actually started utilizing it. And I still have that, you know, that love today. So the whole idea of these smaller projects really allow you to expand to larger things when you show them to particular clients, because they're really looking for something which is unique, extraordinary, exceptionally different, not connected to a competitor at all. And I feel as though that's actually really a remarkable thing. And I feel as though the mixture of understanding the digital and the physical worlds allowed us to do Samsung's Galaxy. And I think that's really where things sort of started off within the sort of brand areas at Pentagram for me. When Samsung came in, said they, you know, sat me down and said, "We love your work and we think it's, you know, there's a sense of craftsmanship in it." I'm like, "Wow, well, thank you." And they basically said, "We would like you to compete for this particular job, which is developing the icon systems and parts of the interface and brand design for Galaxy phone." And I was like, "Okay, this is fantastic." We won that. We did a good job, and that was the start. And then, you know, Oppo came along, you know, a year and a half later. And then we developed their whole brand. And that was exciting and really interesting. And others have done the same thing. So it always starts off with so small things and go.
Oh, your audio went
Like,
dead.
I'm sorry?
Your audio went.
Oh, the work that we had done with Lululemon as well. It started off exceptionally small. They all they wanted us to do was little icons, and then they looked at our process and how we work and how we build things, and then he said, you know what, you know, could you do the manifesto? Can you do our brand, you know, exploration? Can you deal with all these new products that we're coming up with? And so that's what we did. So these are all great examples, or some examples, that really started off exceedingly small.
I mean, that sense of scale, because again, Paula, you've done from City, and I remember seeing that, was that 98 City? And then,
It was launched, I think, it was launched maybe 98, 99, and then all the real massive branding, which changed all the banks, etc. And Lorenzo got involved, and that started in 2000 when we actually started designing the banks, and everybody saw this thing on the street. You know, there was a quick refix of the logo, but it was massive. It still is massive.
but you're doing City, but then you also, which is, we've talked about a lot, and I know it's 25 years now of obviously public theatre. I mean, when did you start getting, because those scale of projects, they're completely different, but you're managing both as an individual in the office, aren't you?
Well, I handle things differently. I learned something in the music industry. I mean, I had a really fortunate existence because there weren't marketing departments really in those days. The record covers were managed by the band's managers mostly, or project managers inside the company, or the A&R guys. And I would make record covers, and sometimes they were completely global before anything was global. I mean, I have things in my portfolio that people are still buying and selling on eBay that were just made because that was the job I had. So I saw this kind of a funny fact that on the one hand, you have an enormous opportunity to have influence or accomplish something in design by making something and having it go out into the universe. And that very often these things are mysterious in terms of what happens with it. You could just as easily design something as good that nobody ever sees and doesn't go anywhere. I mean, there's a lot of happenstance in design. The City logo was picked out of the first, my first sketch, which is essentially what it was, is not strategy or even planning. It was really luck. The thinking about it was right. We could sell it through right, but it could have just as easily been something else. And what I began to find is that what matters to me is what I learn, not what happens after, because I don't control it as much. And that designing the public theater, which at the moment I began working on, it actually had very little money and was a much smaller operation than it is now, was important to me as experimental design, that it was a thing where I was growing with it. And after I realized I was going to end up doing it for free because there was, all kinds of reasons why they couldn't pay me at one point, I began insisting that they don't pay me so I could use it as my lab. That's what that became for me. So that's where I experiment, and that I use the proof of the things I've learned on commercial projects. And then there are things that I do for free that are accidental, like I designed Shake Shack because they were across the park, and like I had to do it because I did the design for Madison Square Park. So I did this logo, and it's still a logo, and it's a global food brand. I mean, how does stuff like that happen? I couldn't have planned that. I made a little H for the High Line that lives for, 20 years. And then the designer of this thing is the biggest tourist attraction in the United States. I cannot say that was planned. That you do things. And I donated the Parks Department its signage program because I could. I was on the design commission for 6 years because I got involved in New York City life. As a designer, I think your connection to the cities you live in are so important. And that's why I tell you how struck I was by Pentagram in London when I first went there and saw how they had really done so much in their city.
Yeah.
And that I could do that for the Parks Department because I knew how to do it, and I could make it, and I could have other projects pay for it, and I could hand it to them.
Yeah.
It only took about 10 years to implement, but they finally did.
But that's the interesting thing, is that we all of us, whether, you know, I've worked on like UAL in London, Virgin Money in England, but then the ones that I still working on, like the London Design Festival or Circular Magazine, that, you know, certainly Circular Magazine, certainly pro bono. Those give me a reputation, but I actually like both. I still like doing the big projects because it's like being in a band or being in a football club and playing to the biggest stadium as opposed to playing the local park or the little club.
Right. Yeah.
But to me, that they and I think Pentagram have always had that duality, and again, you know, thinking about Alan and Colin, and we're working on the book. You're seeing that coming through, that duality of really big, influential projects, but the small projects are equally influential.
I think just to add to that, with you know, Reincorporated, working with Kristen Press, Tobin Heath, and Megan Rapinoe, and you know, their stance in regards to changing the status quo. At first, I actually wrote a scope of services, and they came to me and said, no, you know, we can't do this, and they wanted to go in a different direction. And I was like, oh no, I really believe in what they're doing, and I just said, no, I will do this for nothing, because we really believe in what you do, and we're.
But haven't we always used that power of design for effect? I mean, you know, like Harry's doing for 25 years, the, you know, Witness program. I mean, I don't know a partner that even the most commercial of us still do things either with our industry or have effect in society. I mean, I know that sounds like a cliche, but we still care about that, don't we?
All of us do it. Every partner does it. Every partner does it. They just, some do it more than others, but every partner does it. And they're motivated by the ability to make that kind of contribution, as well as to do some terrific work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's both selfish and unselfish. It's a real way of giving and getting.
And I mean, obviously the last 6 months have been a strain on us all. I mean, but in some ways, certainly you and I, Paula, I think we literally have spoken every week on these platforms, which I know are really annoying, but I mean, in some ways it's connected us more. And certainly you and I and DJ and Michael Garricky on finances have been in regular contact. Does that give us anything which is nice, or has it just been I mean, personally, I think it's been a horrible experience because
Any way you can take this as a good experience.
No, but it's like, you know, for me, my relationship with my team is social. I mean, if I can't sit with them, and I was saying to one of my designers, bless him, he took like 2 hours to move some stuff around, and if we were sitting next to each other, it would be done in 5 minutes. I mean, because Pentagram seems to be, we're doing okay at the moment.
Well, I'll tell you, I can say one good thing about this, and this is back to what you were saying about us speaking every week, is that it doesn't matter if you're in New York or London, because you're talking the same way. You know, like I ate lunch with this man, Eddie Opara, every day for 10 years. Yeah. And I don't get to do that anymore. And it changes the game. And it does equalize New York and London in terms of relationships, because you're on the same Zoom call.
I mean, the aspects of, you know, I normally go up to my desk, and Paula normally gets her lunch earlier. I'm always ask her what she has. She describes it, but then she describes the taste, the texture, and whether or not there's aftertaste towards it. I think that is brilliant, because why are we always talking about design? We need to talk about our health, other things within our life, different narratives and different channels within our working lives. And one of the things with the Zoom calls or with with something like Slack is like, you type it, what are you eating? I mean, that's quite voyeuristically weird. I don't know. I just couldn't do it. I mean, there's good things about the technology. Don't get me wrong. Look at what we're doing here right now, but it can't really, and it shouldn't really force itself to replace the sense of physical interaction and the creativity that actually is spawned from that. And that's a big worry. I look at it again from the point of view that, yeah, I don't see myself as, 48, but I don't see myself as old. I feel myself as a kid in this area. And I'm very technically savvy, but I'm exceedingly worried in regards to how technology is impeding upon our life and the way that we think. And for, its own sake, to be absolutely honest.
Right.
It's looking like it's out of control.
In our political landscape is
Correct.
completely terrifying, and that the COVID is this physical nightmare, and it's layered with levels of fascism about us that are truly terrifying, and we don't know how to stop it. We can't believe our systems.
Yep. Now, many people may have said that the book, right, the printed page was similar, or the sense of the radio or the television. This is significantly different. And we need to not only be observant about where it's going, but be exceedingly critical about how it's actually utilized.
You see, for me, I mean, again, agree with what you said, Eddie, about why I joined is you want to be part of a family. So whether it's on a daily basis, and I know we argue, we moan at each other's design work, and we complain about this, that, and the other. But one, it's on a daily basis, but also when we do get together internationally, as I've heard DJ say and other people, the sharing of work and the sharing of ideas, normally over a club sandwich or whatever we're eating, or soup at lunchtime, is the most important thing when you think about those interactions. And what I'm finding is that even now my team are starting to say, well, it's fairly fun at the beginning, but now it's getting really tiring. And they are all questioning whether we can get back into the studio, because I think without that social interaction, then we almost become an accountancy firm. And seriously, I don't see why we would carry on if this is the new norm. I don't really want to be a part of it.
It's worrying in regards to both ends of the spectrum for people who have been with me for some time, and also, as you put it, the interns. I have an intern right now. He's fantastic, but I'm exceedingly worried because I don't think I'm really teaching you anything. How can I interact with you in any particular way? He's working on many different projects, and so I've decided to sort of make a project for us with him, so in mind, very clearly in mind, and to have a better connection, a better dialogue, better narrative that we can sort of create. And that's really, really important if you have new employees coming in, or even interns. How do they fit in? How do they fit into something which is, really cold? How, the idea of being warmed, and comforted and welcomed on a cold screen is, I can't really fathom it. It's exceptionally difficult. To really understand how people's going through certain things. I know that Dom and I had a conversation yesterday, and it was because I know you, Dominic. And we had this conversation in regards to family, and it was incredibly therapeutic. But I know you. Yeah. When it comes to somebody else that I don't really know as well, and I'm put in the situation that they're having a bit of a problem with whatever project they're trying to deal with, or some family issues. How am I supposed to respond in this particular world that we're in? fascinating and scary at the same time.
I run my team. I would describe it more like an atelier than a design group, because I was always a sketcher, and I always start usually with a sketch I've made. And like, you know, I make sketches, and I email them through my iPhone. You know, like I take a picture of it and I just send them. I send them, so they're getting the same pile of sketches they would get in the office.
Yeah.
And if I've worked with them for 3 or 4 years, they know exactly what the sketch means.
Yeah.
You know, you get a new person, you send them that, and they think, what did she draw?
Yeah.
What letter of the alphabet is that? Like,
Yeah.
they have no,
Yeah.
they don't know how to sketch. And there's no way for them to learn that without actually seeing me draw it while I'm talking about it, and understanding that that mouth sketch connection. Otherwise I have to really sit and make a very, detailed, perfect sketch, which I never do. They're always like these scribbles. It's really a problem for me. It drives me crazy, because it limits who I can work with. And then I have to work through the person who knows how to read my sketch. So they're doing it to the underling because I know it looks like this, but she means that.
Aspects of the sketches, I also sketch and then take a photograph or put it up to the screen.
Yeah.
And the return is like, oh, no, not exactly. But normally I would just say, okay, scoot over. Let me just get on the computer and then actually start to draw it out. And they're like, oh, I get what you're saying here. And then I move away and they start working. That I don't have. I don't have it.
It's gone. It's gone.
Well, I think there's still, as always, after we're coming up to 50 years at Pentagram, there's still no difference between us. we're all the same. We all have the same anxieties. Well,
but the thing is, I don't. As Paula has said, and you have said, Dominic, that the youth push through, and I don't. At this moment in time, I really don't believe that we're staid or overly conservative in regards to the work that we're doing. I think there's some really extraordinarily expansive work. I just think, and I'm just going to say something, maybe, it's going to be at odds with, but I believe that there's certain clients that are exceptionally staid now, and the amount of fight that you have to deal with the aspects of persuasion to get them to do something that is distinctive, not even sense of unique, distinctive, is exceptionally hard. It's getting harder every day, and that's a major question I want to ask.
But that conservatism. I mean, in your country, and I did our host that we might drift into this. That conservatism, and we've got in the UK. Is this what happens, that you go through periods of people not taking risks?
I think that's right, actually. I think this reminds me of recession behavior right now. And I have, Eddie's heard this, but I have, my clients have all cut my fees. And I'm using that to try to push back at them to get them to make better things. Because if you're not going to pay me anything, I've got to lock it, so that is this, but I'm finding it like a bruising battle, really. And the sad thing is that we need to support our teams, and we need to be making things, and the security of being able to fight the good fight isn't there, because when you turn to look at the other resource that's going to take its place, you find yourself back into the same situation because it's so universal. And I think in times of recession and in times of fear, people behave that way. They become recessive, and they clutch, and they are afraid to move, and they don't have a magnanimity of spirit to take a chance. Like I think that some risk-taking behavior or just even being progressive comes out of a spirit of generosity that isn't there.
Correct. Yeah.
That's what I feel.
Correct. But then there's also the aspects that of you know, clients and that are, they say that they want to be unique, but yet they want to copy their competitor who's actually making, you know, exorbitant amounts of profit, who actually has taken that particular risk, and it just doesn't really make any sense. And that it's that that type of fight that is debilitating to a certain degree, and especially when it starts to fester into the team, and they, you know, they come up with great ideas and show those particular ideas, and to the client it looks as though it's the antithesis of what they want, and it's like, okay, you know, what you want is pretty much what everybody's doing and is thinking about. That's not the aspects of, that's not what the strategy is basically telling you. And, you know, the end result, it's a little bit like, you know, Paula wouldn't know this, but like watching Blue Peter when you're a kid. Blue Peter was a kid's show, and they would sort of make something quite handy, and you're like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. And so they make it, and it looks amazing. And they're making it, and then then they stop, and they take an object, and they say, well, this is the end result. I'm like, well,
that didn't look like that one.
That's not what that was. and so what I'm trying to say here is that a lot of the time now is that when you're dealing with the aspects of strategy, and you're leading that into visual design and that sense of process, the end result is not what the strategy was actually indicating in the first place anymore. But yet, what's happening is that you could say marketing or whatever forces are coming to being is pushing you into this particular facet that is not, that looks like everybody else's, and it's exceptionally concerning. And you have to be, one has to be a lot bigger and bolder to argue that particular case, and we have to be exceptionally careful moving forward.
I'm going to end this maybe on something I quote from Alan Fletcher. So Harry and I used to go and see Alan after these conversations with Pentagram London, because he lived around the corner, and we'd always take a bottle of red wine, sit with Alan. And Alan was saying, and I don't know whether it's true, we could argue it maybe for another time, but he said, all the really good work that comes out of Pentagram is because of the great clients. So if you have a great client, they do inspire you to do good work. If you have a mediocre client, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think a lot of our, you know, I think the most impressive work we've done is when you've got a client like Public Theatre or Opera or London Design Festival who've actually been great clients.
Well, I think that even when you talk about great clients, and I know what Alan means by it, you're really talking about one person, not a committee.
Yeah.
You know, that there's, I mean, the Public Theatre can be good because my client is the director of the Public Theatre. There've been two different directors. They've both been great. They make the decisions, they like it, therefore everybody else likes it. That's all there is to it. If you take away that force of power, the whole thing falls apart and there's no reason to do the project anymore. And if you go to even corporate work, Alan had incredible relationships with heads of corporations who liked him, who socialized with him, who he had over for dinner, and they let him do terrific stuff. That's why he could do that beautiful work for Lloyd's at that period of time.
Mm.
He did seriously important work for very big corporations. And also the field was very, you know, there was Total Design and Pentagram and Wolf Olin and then everybody else, you know, that there were only maybe 3 players in the field. It wasn't as quite as complex as it is now in London.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Eddie.
Thank you.
It's always great to see you both. So Paula, I think we're seeing each other again on Thursday night.
Yep, absolutely.
And Eddie, we'll speak soon, yeah?
Yeah, speak soon.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Great. Good job, Dom.
Thank you. Bye.